The Russian sleep experiment is a chilling story where 5 individuals are kept awake for 15 days, showcasing the terrifying impact on their minds and bodies. Now, this is merely a tale, and no evidence exists to confirm its occurrence, but considering the context of the era, some believe that something similar might have been carried out. We must remember that during the same period as this narrative, Russian scientists released footage of severed dog heads kept alive for hours with an artificial blood circulation system. Thus, while this story is fictional, it could be rooted in historical experiments. Let's delve into the story. In the 1940s, Russian scientists decided to experiment with the effects of extreme sleep deprivation. They chose 5 World War II political prisoners, labeled as enemies of the state, promising them freedom if they could remain awake for 30 days. These prisoners were then confined in a small chamber and subjected to an experimental gas stimulant designed to keep them alert. They were monitored via portholes and microphones, supplied with enough food for a month, along with books, running water, a toilet, and beds. For the first 5 days, little occurred, except that the prisoners' conversations grew more emotional, and they began sharing their deepest thoughts. On the 6th day, their behavior deteriorated. They became paranoid, ceased communicating, and started accusing each other of their confinement. They sat with their backs to one another, and strange, inaudible whispers were picked up by the microphones. After 9 days, one man began screaming, running frantically around the chamber, crying so intensely that he lost his voice, reducing it to a whimpering croak. It was later found that he had completely torn his vocal cords. The other 4 captives appeared indifferent to the screaming man, but 2 were seen quietly tearing pages from books, defecating on them, and sticking them to the chamber's glass portholes. By day 14, the scientists were unable to observe inside the chamber. On day 15, the screaming ceased, and silence filled the room. Only the oxygen monitors showed signs of life, and unable to see inside, the scientists feared the men had passed out. At midnight on the 15th day, they decided to open the chamber to check, but before doing so, they sent a message to the men: "We are opening the chamber to test the microphones. Step away from the door and lie flat on the floor, or you will be shot. Compliance will grant one of you freedom." The cell remained silent until a trembling voice responded, "We no longer want to be free." When the scientists entered the cell, they were met with a scene of unimaginable horror. The provided food was untouched, yet blood dripped from the men's mouths. They had chunks of flesh and sinew torn from their bodies, and the destruction of flesh and exposed bones on their fingertips suggested these ghastly wounds were self-inflicted, not by teeth, but by their bare hands, as they had been eating themselves. Some had so much flesh removed that their rib cages were visible, and their internal organs, still functioning, had been taken out of their body cavities. The subjects were motionless and silent, but when the scientists turned off the gas, it triggered a frenzy. They attacked the scientists and guards with such force that one security guard died after having his testicles torn out by one of the subjects' bare hands. 5 more guards were killed. All attempts to sedate the 5 men failed. It was as if their bodies were rejecting any drugs meant to calm them. Even after receiving a dose that would normally incapacitate 3 men, it did not subdue the subjects. In the ensuing violent chaos, 2 of the subjects died from their horrific self-inflicted injuries. The 3 survivors were eventually restrained and bound. All 3 begged to stay awake, refusing anesthesia, and opted to undergo surgical procedures to reinsert their removed organs while fully conscious and without pain relief. The first subject died from blood loss, and it was found that 9 of his bones were broken. The second man, who had started screaming on day 6, unable to speak, communicated by smiling during surgery in a disturbingly satisfied manner. When the surgery concluded, he angrily demanded, by writing on paper, that the surgeon continue cutting. The third subject simply repeated, "I must remain awake," though horrified by the monsters they had created. The scientists remained fascinated by their subjects' behavior and decided to return the 2 surviving men to the chamber, re-exposing them to the gas. Only one returned to the chamber. The other fell asleep and died. The final surviving subject grew impatient, demanding immediate return to the chamber. He broke free from his restraints, seized a guard's gun, and shot 2 scientists in the head. He was quickly subdued, and before more harm could be done, one of the scientists grabbed the gun and aimed it at the subject, shouting, "What are you? I must know." The subject replied, "Have you forgotten so easily? We are you." We are the madness that lurks within you all, begging to be free at every moment in your deepest animal mind. We are what you hide from in your beds every night. We are what you sedate into silence and paralysis when you go to the nocturnal haven we cannot tread. The scientist staggered back before shooting the subject. As he lay dying on the floor, he gasped his final words. So nearly free. That concludes the Russian sleep experiment. As mentioned, this is a fictional story, but it's conceivable that it was inspired by historical events. It's undeniable that if a nation could discover a method to keep soldiers awake for extended periods, it would significantly enhance their combat capabilities. Experiments like the Stanford prison experiment, Nazi experiments, and the CIA's MKUltra mind control program demonstrate that psychological experiments on humans akin to this have indeed occurred. Thanks for watching, and remember to get some sleep.